My name is Terry Van Vallis. My presentation today is about our Open Educational Resources Sustainable, or OERs as they are called. Before I proceed, I'd like you to watch two videos. One talks about the benefits to students, and the other one talks about the benefits to the instructor and the institution. I think that both videos will set the tone and give you a pretty good idea what I mean by OERs and sustainability. Both videos were obtained from the Lumen Learning website, founded by David Wiley.
Open educational resources are already having a very real impact on students' lives where they're being used. We're hearing stories now from some of the schools that Lumen Learning works with about students either lining up outside the department head's door or outside the dean's door and saying, now my friend signed up for a section of this class where there is no textbook that they have to buy because they're using this open textbook thing, but the section that I'm taking has a $170 textbook and access code fee associated with it.
When we started the OER project at Tacoma Community College, the average cost of textbooks per year for the students was $1,267. That's the cost of tuition for a full quarter.
When our students or our faculty or administration talk about a Z course, what they are referring to is a course where all publisher content has been removed and replaced with openly licensed content. The impact of the Z courses and the Z degree on students has been an amazing and inspiring evolution to watch. I actually have some of the students who went to those very first orientation sessions in my courses now. And they have told me on more than one occasion that textbooks have been a barrier to them continuing and completing their education.
It changes the game. They're able to hit the ground running from the very beginning of the course. They don't have to wait on money or make decisions about, does my kid play soccer or do I purchase this textbook? They don't have to make those decisions.
One of our faculty members said in their survey, the thing that they like most about the open education resource isn't necessarily the cost savings for the students, but the engagement of the students immediately on the start of the class, and the fact that they're interacting with materials in the real world the way that they would interact with materials if they were in the discipline.
Prior to using open educational resources, approximately 50% of my students in Intro to Psychology were passing with a C or better. After the first 2 semesters of using open educational resources, I saw a slight increase, maybe 54%. Then these last 2 semesters where I've used open educational resources that were more interactive, I've seen 75% of my students pass with a C or better.
OER has provided me with the opportunity to engage students on a deeper level than I ever anticipated, and making them more a part of the learning process. When they are creating, sharing, and licensing their own materials, one, they become authors of the course, which is exciting, but they're also sharing information that is potentially has a far greater impact on future students.
When faculty talk to me, what they usually say is the biggest benefit is the freedom to do what they want in their teaching. I think the engagement they experience in their classes is what keeps them going in OER.
We are continually surprised by the habits that are in place around commercial textbooks that none of us recognize. And so we start to find faculty members shedding ineffective practices that are really placed upon them by the restrictions of copyright and commercial textbooks.
I found that when I was using a $180 algebra book, I sort of felt obligated to use the book, to follow it and really stick to it. Whereas when I was using a free book, I felt sort of relieved and I felt more free to experiment and innovate with the class. So I felt free to change the order of the book.
As we work with the faculty members, there's a training process that's occurring through that implementation. So we're helping them align the materials with their outcomes, identify areas where maybe the existing resources aren't meeting their needs. and helping them with both refining those or identifying additional materials so that we're really getting a core set of materials that are customized to the needs of the institution and that have the flexibility for a single faculty member to adapt them to his or her own teaching style and preferences and pedagogy. The faculty members quite often take a much greater level of control of the content, and what we see most often is faculty members, once they have their hands on materials that they can really edit and refine, they reduce the amount of content that exists. They're really focusing their student learning on the outcomes for the course.
One day in class, my students asked me if I could make a modification to the program that evening. They were struggling with the way they were getting a response with the MyOpen Math, and I was able to go home that evening and make that correction to MyOpen Math, and the next day they were able to get the program that they wanted.
That freedom to pick and to choose and to adapt and to think on your feet and to really hone in on what's important. I think that for a lot of us, that's why we became teachers to begin with.
I hope watching the videos have inspired you, have also given you some insight into the benefits of OERs, and I'm sure that has sparked some questions concerning the sustainability of OERs. My presentation, I'm hoping, is going to address some of those questions. So let's look at some of the points that I'll be addressing today. The definition of OERs, I think it's important to break that down. The meaning of sustainable. Of course, we need to understand what is the purpose of OERs in the first place. I'll present some data and also some current models that exist. And of course, I cannot present without pointing out some of the challenges and barriers facing the success and sustainability of OERs. And then lastly, I will provide a few future considerations, some of which are from the resources and some are from my predictions. I will now define what open educational resources are, but I'll start with open, secondly resources, and lastly education. So open. When you think of that word, what does that mean to you? Well, I think immediately free. As a matter of fact, a lot of people think the same thing. But of course, it has different meanings to different people. Walker, Wiley, Foote, Daniel, and the Public Library of Science have provided some other things to consider what open might mean. Obviously available to everyone, easy access, freedom to copy and modify. What that means is I can copy somebody's resource that is considered open. I can modify it and provide my perspective, my opinion, other content, save it, and redistribute. And then another person could do the same exact thing. And so that's what open, in a nutshell, means. So resources. Resources really means anything. And my guess is that many would have responded that resources are physical or digital objects such as an image, a graphic, text, and multimedia, when in fact resources include some of what I displayed on the screen. This is not an exhaustive list, by the way. These are just some of the resources that I thought were interesting that were defined as possibly being an open resource. The definition of resources, I should see, is quite diverse. In Alcott, Johnstone, UNESCO, just to name a few, feel the same way. I mean, there's a much larger list I could have provided. And so if we look at a web page, say for instance, many think that that should be open. So I could copy it, add my content, maybe some images and some other things, save it and use it as mine, and also distribute it if I wish. Lessons, the same thing. Why not? So courses and modules and any of the tools that are associated with the assessment or building of the course, like an LMS, say for instance, would also be a resource or considered open. So really the idea here is any resources that are available, why not share them? Why recreate really the wheel? And then lastly, what I thought was interesting was visiting lecturers and experts. I mean, it's expensive to hear a lecturer, and sometimes very difficult to even get to an expert. And so if they were open, think about really how profound that would be to an individual that could not afford to hear a lecture or have the opportunity to meet an expert. So these are just a few, resources that we could consider as open. So I want to address educational last, as this is broken down by formal and informal. So when you look at OERs, how do they really fit in a formal course, a credit-bearing course? Well, you would look at that as informal, quite honestly. So they are looked at as supplements and as complements to a formal credit-bearing course. However, let's just say an open educational course would not be considered as a credit bearing. Matter of fact, there's debate about why that should be. You can provide a certificate of mastery, but not credit. So as an example, for instance, MIT and Harvard, who make their courses freely accessible, they offer certificates of mastery. However, their students cannot take these courses because they're not credit bearing, and so therefore they're not going to grant them credit and they're not going to allow them to apply that to their degree. On the other hand, we have somebody challenging this particular idea, and that's Open Educational Resource University. They offer 8 general study courses that can be applied towards a general study bachelor's degree. So I think that's kind of interesting. But those are the difference between formal and informal, and I think that as we move forward in the future, hopefully the waters are not still as muddy when it comes to this, but that they will kind of figure it out, or we will figure out how OERs are going to be, how they're going to fall into our formal and informal learning environment. Sustainable. I think when we all think of sustainable, I think we think of revenue as the component that is going to support a particular project or initiative. And I think with OERs, I don't think that's any different. However, there's many other components that need to be sustainable in order for OERs to be successful. So I've listed a few here, of which I'm not going to cover all of them. But scalability is one in particular that's important, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the models in another couple slides. But if a model is scalable from an institution to an institution, that's important. But if it's not, then that's a problem. Or if in fact it's not scalable in a sense, it started small and now it's gotten quite large, or you didn't really plan for it to be scalable beyond that, that's also an issue. And of course, there is no single metric or calculation that is going to really make or break a particular initiative. Because again, it depends on the objectives of the organization and the individual. I think that sustainable means that if you're meeting your goals and you're meeting the objective, then maybe you are, sustainable. Now, of course, when you look at the production and the flow of resources, and even open, if in fact you don't have a flow of open educational resources and they're not easily accessible, that's a problem. So if the definition of open changes, for instance, where resources are not open and you can't use them, you can't reuse them, well, what does that mean? How does that change the model? Is it now sustainable? So I hope you are getting the idea what I mean by sustainable. All components need to be sustainable, and if one component is not, then the model might not be sustainable. And what I mean by might, I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, an OER project is not really bringing in a steady revenue stream. However, the revenue stream is being seen somewhere else, and maybe that was the objective of the particular project, is that the money is going to be generated somewhere else. So just think about that. I mean, it is another way to think about it. What are OERs trying to accomplish and address in today's society? Depending on who you read, there are many reasons for providing OERs, and I'm sure you can come up with some of your own reasons. I've placed a few here on my slide. Some of them come from Knox, Ollicott, Swan, King, and a few others. So the first one is bridging the digital divide. We're always trying to close that gap and provide equal opportunities to those who have limited access to resources, which in turn, really the idea, is to empower those individuals, organizations, and countries which we're hoping impact their local communities and our global economy. When we look at quality, I look at quality simply as providing free resources, which expands the number of resources students are exposed to. So what does that mean? It means elevating and enhancing the learning environment in the human life, which I feel bleeds into sharing knowledge. I don't really feel we learn without others. We cannot share, we cannot learn by ourselves. We need others to expand and enhance our knowledge and widen our perspective and elevate our understanding and knowledge base. So what does this really mean? Well, it really means to exclude no one and embrace collaboration.